Well, welcome to the 25th session of the Coffees with Secretary General, this time in partnership with the Inclusive Growth Initiative. Our guest, Princess Laurentien of the Netherlands, is an extremely active advocate on so many issues that we hold dear at the OECD. Among her many roles, she is UNESCO's Special Envoy on Literacy for Development. She is founder of the Reading and Writing Foundation, fellow of the European Climate Foundation, and she is a special advisor for, is it Rewilding Europe? Rewilding, making it wild again? Yeah? So it's not wild enough, you know? It's not, okay, well, okay, for Rewilding Europe. And that's for the World Wildlife Fund, the WWF. She's also the founder of Missing Chapter Foundation, which facilitates the dialogue between children and leaders. It very much supports the theory that decisions are more durable and gain value if they take into account the sharp insights, the logical questions, and the surprising solutions from children. In fact, we just had a very good example of that. We just had a very interesting conversation with 15 primary and secondary school children from the Dutch School of Paris. They voiced their concerns about the world in which we live in, the world that we are creating for them, and how they can play an important role in shaping it. They also told us how they thought that we should behave in order to get better outcomes. So I appointed them all advisors to the Secretary General. So, Princess, you have come to share your experiences and exchange ideas with us on a new perspective on inclusive growth, learning from children, actually. I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting exchange. If we had listened more carefully to the reflections and demands of children like the Petite Prince, Alice in Wonderland, Huckleberry Finn, Anne Frank, and even Malala more recently, we would have built a brighter and certainly a better world. So before passing the floor to Ambassador van Hulst, now normally he's sitting over there, so you know, over here today, and then to our guest of honor, let me take the opportunity to remind you that today we are launching our March on Gender. Huh? Over the next 3 days, we're inviting experts from around the world to speak on issues from transforming negative gender roles in the household, addressing harassment complaints in the workplace, to diversity and growth strategies in business, and of course, bridging the digital gender gap. This will help us get a better focus on combating inequalities and opportunities in gender equality issues, sustainable inclusive growth, the workplace, the so-called pay gap, labor market participation, and the glass ceiling, which we all try to break all the time. So I invite you all to follow these important and interesting debates. So, Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. And this is really just very briefly to also on my behalf and on behalf of the permanent delegation of the Netherlands, of course, to warmly welcome Her Royal Highness to the OECD. We're very happy that this could take place, and this we managed to organize this. And we are very much looking forward to your contribution. I think we're all still, at least those of us who were present still recovering from the dialogue with the children, which had one important message to all of us, including myself, which is talk less and listen more. So this is for me the best moment to shut up and pass the floor to Her Royal Highness. Thank you.
Well, it is indeed a great pleasure to be here with you. And this is not a speech. This is a conversation. And I had hoped to walk around, to disrupt. So let's pretend we're at home and we think freely and we're not in our institutional bubble, as someone in the dialogue mentioned. We talked a lot about, and I'll share that with you, we talked indeed about the key dilemma that we discussed with the children was what does OECD needs to do in order for its recommendations to be followed through? Perhaps a recognizable dilemma that you might have. We talked about the frustration that when you think you're right, how do you convince somebody that you're right? Well, not with more arguments, but with better questions and more listening and putting yourself in the shoes of the other, was the advice of one of the children. But in order to take advice, also as OECD, from others who might know, as the children said, you also need to dare and be able to listen. So what are the qualities in order to listen? So questioning is a big thing. So I'd like to start with something that we always do with the Kids Council. We now have over 100 companies in the Netherlands and in Germany with the Kids Council. I'd like to ask you 3 questions. Now, it didn't happen we didn't have time in the dialogue just now, but in the Kids Council, and I'll talk a little bit about my methodology of dialogue, we always have voting. When people answer questions, we always ask the children to close their eyes. And interestingly, all the boards that we work with no exception, they walk out and they say, we're going to do this voting with our eyes closed in our board meetings. Now, you probably understand why that is. So I would like to ask you to close your eyes. If you have the confidence in me that I am the only one who sees the answer, when I ask a question, you raise your hand if you agree with that. So I'd like you to close your eyes. Usually it's easier to get a class of 50 kids to close their eyes than a room full of adults. But let's try this chaos. Who of you regularly thinks, I know better? Who finds it difficult to ask for help? And who finds talking easier than listening? Thank you. You can open your eyes. I think that those were some of the issues that were discussed in this discussion, and that is maybe, hopefully, in the next 40 minutes that I will share with you, also through questioning some of the findings that we have through the Kids Council and in living with one leg in the world of adults and decision makers, and with the other leg in the world of children. But I will also talk to you that in a way my work with children is symbolic for a dialogue with any citizen. So I work with refugees, I work with people who are unskilled, illiterate, former prisoners. I see an advisor in everyone who is real. But then the question is, when you get the advice of these individuals, do you have the ability to listen in between the lines what they're actually saying? So in a way, what I do is inclusion in practice. And I translate their human insights into what I would call effective solutions. I'm going to talk to you about three things. I'll give you a little bit about the context of my work. I've tried to put it, I don't always understand what I do. That's the beauty of my daily work. Perhaps you can recognize that and perhaps not, but it's definitely something to try, to not understand exactly what you do, because it keeps you on your toes. So I'll explain a little bit, and I try to put labels on my work that you hopefully understand and it resonates. I will talk to you a little bit about the methodology that we use and that I've built up over the last 17 years in dialoguing and listening to people from on the ground who can give us insights, and I'll give you very concrete examples of how I believe you take a human insight and use it as the starting point to develop solutions and systems. And then finally, I will take a specific example on your wonderful inclusive growth initiative, talking and connecting it to my work with on illiteracy. So the labels that perhaps best describe my work is social innovation. I work on literacy, on sustainability, on debt relief, on poverty, through dialogue, and always wanting to come up with what you mentioned as well in your inclusive growth initiative, people-centered solutions. But it's a word that we use so easily. What exactly is a people-centered solution? That's a difficult thing for people who think in systems. So it sounds interesting and it sounds easy, but it's not so easy because it requires listening and it requires understanding what is it exactly that somebody needs, and then use that as a starting point for your solutions. I didn't realize 17 years ago when I started with literacy that what I was doing in a way was disruptive design thinking. That's the methodology you will hear a little bit about. I never studied for that, so everything I do is being built up through intuition and then practice and by reading a lot of insights from others. And the methodology can also be best described as co-creation. And co-creation, again, is, I would call it, organized chaos, because the hardest thing for people who have knowledge is to not understand or know beforehand what the outcome will be. Because then you think it's chaotic. We want linear thinking. We want to understand what the end result is. We are fearful that people will judge us on, well, how do you know if it made impact? Well, we don't know. You co-create with people, and you cannot predict what people think. So it is, in a way, co-creation is organized chaos. I have one basic assumption that I've built up over life, over the last, over my last, indeed, 17, 20 years, and that I believe deeply, and I will talk about that, about inclusive growth, that solutions developed for people will never be effective solutions. So solutions developed with people will be effective solutions. We talk about ivory towers, we talk about developing solutions in silos. How can we develop solutions for refugees if we don't understand the sentiments of refugees? We can try and put ourselves in the shoes of others, but we don't know exactly what the deeper sentiment is that people go through. And the magic is that you will find in that one seemingly small in-between sentence that if you hear that, you say, bingo, that is the key to develop the intervention that we need. And I will share with you 3 examples or 4 examples of how I've done this in practice. One comes from homeless people. Many years ago, I did my studies, my undergraduate, my graduate studies, my master's at Berkeley in the US, and as a privileged European child, I was mesmerized, negatively, but also stunned by how people fall in between the cracks in society. And I spent 3 days on the beach of Venice Beach outside of Los Angeles with homeless people. And they had a measure developed by people who, of course, had never lived on the beach, and saying, we want homeless people to start work. We want to get them out of their isolation. You can fill in all the gaps in all the reports that we read. So what was the solution? We give all homeless people a bus ticket, because then they can go to town and they can go and do the interview, and then we've solved the problem. We take them from the beach to town. Nobody used the bus ticket. So that $1 million program went up in the air. Why? Why did no homeless person use that bus ticket? Well, I tell you, for those of you who've never woken up on the beach in the sun, you feel lousy. You feel useless, worthless, dirty. So I believe that the better solution would have been to put showers on the beach. Did anybody ever have a discussion with the homeless people or sleep on the beach for a night, for 2 nights, for 3 nights? Did anybody ever ask them, what do you need in order to go and get a job? You would have known that waking up like that is never going to give you the confidence to even go to the bus and use your bus ticket, because you are ashamed. Now that is a sentiment as deep as mankind, but the only thing you need to do is go and have a dialogue and understand what is it that you need. But they're only homeless people. They smell bad. The second one is from an advice from one of the kids' councils on obesity. We spend millions and millions and millions of dollars around the world teaching children to eat better. But when you have a discussion with children, they say, but I'm not the one who goes to the supermarket and buys the food. I'm not the one to cook. So what are you telling me? I know what I need to eat. You need to tell my parents. So of course, millions of dollars, they go up in the air because we need family programs. But we find it more difficult to tell adults how to eat better than to tell children. So we skip the adults because we think it's patronizing and we don't dare to do it. But we have done studies and which shows that there's no impact on behavior if we tell kids to eat more healthily. And the third example of people-centered solutions and having and understanding emotions as the core to start your people-centered solutions is on illiteracy. As somebody with knowledge and who has studied, when you have a gap in your knowledge and you want to solve that gap, you go to a place where you can fix that lack of knowledge. So what do? Again, we spend millions on building knowledge institutes, because that's what one does. You fix your knowledge by going to a knowledge institute. In the Netherlands, we realized, and after a number of years, I realized there weren't any people going to knowledge institutes who were illiterate. And I was pushing and putting it on the agenda and raising awareness for it. We started to dig a little bit deeper. And over the years, if there's people I've talked to the most, it's probably, apart from decision makers, it's probably people who have illiteracy, who have lacked the reading and writing skills. And if there's one trend that you can see and feel and sense from anyone, especially people who've been born and bred in the countries, and in Europe we have 1 in 5 Europeans who has a lack of, who has not sufficient literacy skills, it's a sense of shame. You feel ashamed because we live in digital societies. We live in a society where everybody expects you to read and write. Our tax forms are online, everything becomes, so what? And when nobody talks about it, which we call in policy land taboos, then you think you're the only one. That is a human sentiment, so you hide. So isn't then sense of shame the starting point, I thought, that we need not institutes of knowledge. We need to bring and organize knowledge near people. Wherever people go, you have a feeling, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. I don't need to be ashamed of being illiterate. To the banks, to the employment agencies, at the doctors, all the places where you go suddenly become places of intervention who actually people say, it's okay. I know for you to go and I have a volunteer who can help you do that. And I tell you, on that notion, put on a little map, I drew this with the Minister of Education at the time, and I said, can we try to build a system to fix the issue of illiteracy? In the Netherlands, 1 in 9 individuals lacks the reading and writing skills. And can we try and do this from the human inside, the sense of shame? And can we build a system around that? And forget about the knowledge institutes for the moment. Maybe they can play a role in this system. And she trusted me, and we did this for a little bit of money. And it turned out that for 1/10 of the money, we reached 10 times more people. So instead of attaining 6,000 people, we're now actually organized an entire ecosystem from a human-centered perspective around people, and we're attaining 60,000 people. So I believe, crazy enough as it may sound, that a simple human insight can actually be the starting point of building different type of solutions. And children understand this like no other, like the dialogue in a moment just said. So from this, that's actually what my work is. I constantly listen in between the lines and have dialogues with people and think, what is the problem we need to fix? Debt relief, poverty, all those kind of huge, complex problems in the end are about people. So your work is about people. So in order to understand what your work is and should be, understanding people, I believe, is the key thing. What's the methodology? The first thing is that you need to, as we just saw in the dialogue, you need, if you co-create, you need to start dissecting and need to dare to go in almost like an MRI of different steps. Too often we come up with solutions where we think, we listen, we talk, we come up with a solution all at the same time. So you need to start, when you're dissecting a problem, to really dare to go step by step by step, as the children advise us to do. The first thing, and the Secretary General referred to this with the children, understanding at the first step, what is the real problem we're trying to solve? So when you start a new piece of research, is it the problem that's the visible problem we're trying to solve, or is there actually a deeper problem under the table that is the real problem we're trying to solve? I give you one example from a big accountancy firm with their kids' council, and the dilemma that they wanted to put to the children was, how can we make sure that people trust the financial sector? So we all think, wow, that's a good question. That's a real dilemma. That's what we talk about in the press every day. So we had a long discussion with the board, and we said, that's not good enough. What's the problem? The children are going to ask, who doesn't trust whom? And in the end, the real dilemma was, how do we, accountancy firm EY, how do we make sure that people trust us? So suddenly, they put, in a very vulnerable way, in a way, they actually said, okay, we have a problem that people don't trust us. But it took us weeks of discussion with the board that they actually shared the truthful dilemma. So we think often that we have the key question on the table, but very often it's not really the question. So asking why 10 times helps us to get to the core of the problem. Then you need to have a dialogue with people and say, is this real? So if it's a problem about poverty, I would actually say, what are the real issues? Well, go and talk to people living in poverty. Think of my homeless people on Venice Beach, because they can actually immediately spot and say, yeah, but come on, that's not the real issue. The real issue is not the 25-cent bus ticket, but it's the problem when I wake up that I feel lousy. So I believe once you have the real problem on the table, that you immediately talk to the people who know best, who is people on the ground. And then, of course, important, which is your main strength, is to do the research. And in our Kids Council methodology, the kids do free research on the basis of a lot of information, the annual reports, all kinds of things. But let people think freely and not box them in immediately. Because the moment you're boxed in, as you well know, you come up with no innovative solutions. And then is a dialogue in our methodology of the Kids Council. Then it's the board of directors of the company dialoguing with the children. And just now we had a taste, not a depth, an in-depth, but a taste of what a dialogue is. A dialogue is about rules of the game, another thing we find very difficult. Who asks the questions? I think in every board, without exception, people say, wow, I can't remember the time I listened and I only asked questions. If our leaders don't know how to ask the right questions, how on earth are they going to lead? So in our way, in our methodology, we try also, that's an intervention in itself, that these leaders learn to ask the right questions. And then, of course, and this is key to any time you would want to listen to people, is accountability. Very often we get advice and we seek advice, be it from young people or from other people, but we don't really take it into account, maybe because we don't understand it. And we certainly don't take the trouble to go back to the people and explaining what that advice has done with us and explaining why we will or will not implement that advice. So in your context with your member states, if something, explaining why you did something back to the people is extremely important, because then the children will really feel be taken seriously. And with adults, it's no different. Very often, we're very opportunistic. We get people's input, and then we say, oh, thank you very much. This is how it fixes, how it fits into my box. And then we forget about thanking people afterwards and saying, oh, you know what, that advice was really useful. This is what I did with it. Well, for the children, that's extremely important. And what we say is that if you go about it that way, you don't, you really take them seriously. And then, of course, comes the implementation stage, which I understand for you sometimes is a challenge for member states to implement this. In a moment, I'll ask you a question about the things you've heard relating back to your work. But before that, dialogue. I already mentioned a few things. Children say that if you debate constantly, if you always want to be right, people will never trust you. And for an organization that knows so much, I bet that must be difficult sometimes. Why don't they understand what we mean? Why don't they implement our wonderful advice? Well, maybe some of the earlier steps of dialogue helps. And in true dialogue, you're equal. Just now, by changing the rules of the game of a dialogue, a Secretary General of a reputable organization is exactly equal to a 10-year-old child. Why? Because the Secretary General has one piece of the puzzle and the 10-year-old has another piece of the puzzle. Accepting that we only have one piece of the puzzle is the hardest thing to do. And the more intelligent and the more knowledgeable you are, the tougher it is. And the more expectations there are from the outside world that they tell you you have to have the answers, the harder it is to accept that and to say, you know what, I don't have the answer. Let me ask somebody else, as the children just said to the Secretary General. If you don't know, ask a partner who does know. Putting yourself in the shoes of the other. The children were very clear about that in a moment, saying how important that is. And I just mentioned how that could be. And in the pre-discussions that we had, they also said no narcissism. Interesting that they know that word. No narcissism and no arrogance. So, let go of your ego. I one time had a long dialogue with children about dissecting the notions of leadership. And the children came up with the following definitions. They said, leadership is letting go of thinking you always have to be the best. Leadership, and all these verbs were in one sentence. Leadership is learning to let go of thinking you always have to be the best. I think that that is the beauty of things. And if we dare to let go, you leave room for questions, you leave room for a new curiosity. And I think that a knowledge institute such as OECD is so well positioned, now how tough it is, it could be, is well positioned to show that openness. You have your NGOs that can help you think differently. You have your companies that also have a piece of the puzzle, who is also an advisor to you. No one needs to know everything, even OECD. A question to you before I close with some thoughts on inclusive growth and open the floor for further questionings. Because it is a conversation, even though I talk far too more than I usually do. I usually ask questions and listen. Of what I say, what resonates with you? What do you recognize in your daily work? This is a conversation of openness, and what resonates? Do you recognize some of the thoughts that I share? I saw some people nodding. I saw some people writing things down. Is it all nonsense that I mention? What resonates? Please share.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. It was interesting to listen to you, and I will start with your question, but go to your first question first, where you asked us to close our eyes and ask whether we are always right. And my answer was no, because I had a very long training with my daughter, who very early on, with arguments, convinced me that, no, I was not right. You know, she was right. So on your question also, does OECD always think it's right or that the advice should be followed? She told me also when she was 8 or 9 that I can't expect her to learn from my mistakes, that she has to make her own. And I think, unfortunately, this is how we go on, and we would have probably a quicker progress if we did learn from mistakes of history or others, but that's how human nature is. My question to you would be, and I also very much agree that we need to find solutions with people, because that talks about ownership. And unless people buy in to any idea that we have, I think our chance of success is much diminished. And that goes in development project or anywhere else. We have to include everyone. My question would be, in your discussions with children, what worries me today when I look at, younger children, and you see not just the children, but their parents often in a restaurant, rather than talking to each other, being on their mobile phones all the time. So in your answers that you get, do you find that fear that social skills are maybe neglected on the account of technology today? Thank you.
Indeed. Interestingly, there are three parts to my answer. One is, it's another example of where we tend to look to children, and we talk about children being on their phones the whole time. And it's actually adults teaching children to be on the phone the whole time. And there's a very interesting book that I've been reading talking about this, called Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age, by a sociologist in the United States called Sherry Turkle. And what it's not an anti-technology book, but she is actually painting a pretty glooming picture that what we're in is a crisis of empathy. And we are talking about radicalization, polarization, populism, social cohesion being under pressure, and so on. In the end, no society exists without empathy. So I believe that indeed a crucial thing, but again, we can only do that from understanding human behavior and human interaction and what happens in the transaction between a child and a parent and how does that work. I believe, A, children deeply understand the importance of true connection. So true, but the example that we give is the wrong one. So it's the same with reading. Yes, I believe in digitalization, but the example of physical books is so important because otherwise children never see adults reading. And we know from research, no doubt also developed by OECD, we know from research that children will pick up examples from adults. So if we don't see physical books, children will not understand. And saying on your iPad, I'm reading a book, is not the same. The imprint on the brain is just simply different. So yes, I believe that the digital aspect is something crucial. I believe I've seen, the book was recommended to me by the CEO of one of the big telecoms companies in the Netherlands, and he said, I'm reading this book, it makes me turn my stomach and keeps me awake at night. And I'm developing now a program with them because he feels that if we don't get this right, in 10 years' time, he's waking up as the CEO, and he said, I contributed to the downfall of humanity. And I feel that some of the debates on the digitalization in society are too narrow-minded, where we don't take not so much the downsides of technology, but the upsides of dialogue into combination. And this is why I'm grateful to the CEO that he brought this book to my attention. Sherry Turkle does not know that I keep talking about her book, so I could well be her agent. But very, very interesting notion, and I'm now going to work with some tech companies. When you listen to what Facebook has now said, realizing the limitations of what they've been doing, I think that is definitely a trend that I see. And I would deeply recommend involving children and adults and families of understanding what the true daily interaction is and where does it go wrong. Other thoughts of what resonates, or dilemmas that you have, questions that you have in your daily work, listening to the way that I've been approaching solutions. Children always raise their hands, but adults find that very difficult. But I have one rule of the game, and I never give the parole to people who don't raise their hands, because it puts you on the spot and in an unsafe feeling. But surely you must have dilemmas, questions, things that keep you awake. Thank you for raising that issue, and we may need 2 hours and a drink, but I won't do that. So I try, and do stop me. A few thoughts, because what you raise is something that is extremely dear to me, but also puzzling. In 2012, a bit of context, and then I'll come to the answer from a content point of view. In 2012, I had the privilege of being asked by the then European Commissioner for Education, Mrs. Vassiliou, to lead the high-level group on literacy. It was the first time that the European Commission looked at literacy, and the outcome was very clear. 1 in 5 Europeans, for them, the world is hard to read. And we need to act now, and I'm still working after all these years to try and put it at the center as a horizontal issue on the EU agenda. And I asked the group of 14 very knowledgeable scientists on different aspects of literacy. I said, I want to have a very simple list of 10 myths about literacy. And unanimously, they came up with the following, and saying, every child can, in principle, learn to read and write. And I said, what about dyslexia? It turns out that there are 27 definitions of dyslexia. And for them, it was very clear, having done research in all the different countries that they were representing. And they said, we're talking about a mismatch between the way a child learns and the system we're proposing and the methodology we're imposing, rather not proposing, but imposing on the child. And this has stuck with me. That was the biggest revelation for me. And intuitively, I had always stayed away from the dyslexia community, because I wanted to go to the source of fixing the issues. But it never stopped, because no child deserves, and you as a mother of a child who is struggling with reading and with all the psychological consequences this may have, it may resonate. It stopped me. So I heard about an intervention that they are doing in the UK, and they shifted what we do in the Netherlands, as an example. In the Netherlands, we let a child struggle. So we impose a methodology, we let the child go on because we say, well, you know, the different age, but in a way, we are exacerbating the problem and we're not fixing it. Because in our system, we say, no, it's only at 11 or 12 that we start to test and so on. And then it's not fixed. We're not surprised. And then we say, oh, but we have a dyslexia declaration and we can put a child in a dyslexia box. Oh, how wrong can this be to let a child struggle? Just because it's not fixing, it's not fitting the system and the methodology we're proposing. So this intervention in the UK, they did something very smart from the perspective of the child, this human-centered thinking. And they shifted the moment of intervention and said, not struggle, hesitation is the key. The moment we feel that a child is hesitating, we pick them up and we say, why are you hesitating? Why don't you like reading? Is it okay? And it turned out that some children are shy, and that reading aloud in class is actually, it's not, again, the reading that is the problem, it's the shyness. But for a child to be constantly the bad one in the back of the class, being shy and being asked to do something that they find that nobody asked them. So it turned out that for some children who were struggling, who were hesitating, who were not up to the speed with the class, they gave them a theater lesson. They gave them confidence, and it wasn't reading. Now, I don't have exactly the statistics to back up to say that if you let that child struggle, that child with 2 theater lessons may have ended up in the box of dyslexia or in the box of maybe quitting school. So I find shifting the moment of intervention way to the beginning, So I went to the UK, and I was really fascinated by this intervention. And I thought I had found the magic pilule of fixing prevention. But then in the school, I thought, this is not exactly what it is. And the school director gave me one insight that I'm now actually starting to work upon in the Netherlands as an intervention, and hopefully working with OECD and a few other countries to start finding out if this innovation actually works. The school director of this program in one of the schools said, you know, it's really interesting. I've got kids in my school, and they come into school and they can't tell me what they had for breakfast. So I said, well, probably they didn't. It was in a disadvantaged area of London. And I said, well, maybe it's because they didn't have breakfast. He said, no, no, he had breakfast. And he said, but nobody speaks to them. Nobody tells them, John or Mohammed, this is une tartine. So the moment you start reading and learning to read, if you don't have the concept of a piece of bread, and we know, again, your education department has all the facts, you know that by reading and writing, you need to know the words, you need to know the structure of the sentence, and you need to know the semantics. You need to understand what words mean. If you don't have the concept of some key words, and there are 3,000 words that children need to know as a concept of life, because they weren't spoken on. So maybe then intervention starts at -9 months, that the intervention is that we work with women who may want to become mothers at some point, and to tell them how important it is to talk to your child. And maybe that intervention could be one of the aspects to truly start working on prevention of illiteracy and making sure that children, all children, like the academic said, all children can in principle learn to read and write. But it asks from us with systems to find out this child needs this, that child needs that, but not let them struggle later on in life. And I'm now working on a program to conclude, and I'm sorry, but as I predicted, but I'm now working on a program, on an innovation where I want to understand how to build this, how to actually put this insight of these academics into practice, and saying, what is the system we do need to put in place? What is it, not the system, what solutions do we need to put in place so that indeed we do make sure that every child will learn to read and write? And when you start dissecting this, you realize that every system is built on another half assumption. So we accept that 25% of the school children in the Netherlands start their school career with a backlog in language of 2 years. And then we're constantly fixing that suboptimal situation. But what is it that we need, starting from age -0, -9 months perhaps, working with mothers, to consistently make sure that we start making sure that everybody around the child says, come hell or high water, we're going to make sure that you learn to read and write. But not fit the children into our systems, but our systems fitting children. So that's the innovation I'm now working on in the Netherlands. I hope to work with OECD on this and some other countries to say if my folie can be proven. And we did it once with the human insights of the adult illiterates. So why not do this with the insights of children?
And Your Royal Highness, we are in very good hands because you have here Yuri Belfavi, who is the head of the PISA program. So we will be thinking about these concepts. I think we have one question in the back, Alice, and then we have that one, and the ambassador aspect.
As the Secretary General mentioned, we have a very rich program of events for International Women's Day over the next few days. One of the areas that we're particularly interested in, in looking at is gender stereotypes and how they affect girls from a really young age and hold them back, for example, from pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, but also maybe in other areas, going into leadership positions. Is this something that you found has come up at all in the kids' councils? Do you notice that the girls are a bit more stand back instead of the boys, or the boys dominate, or has that just not been an issue at all?
Every class is different, and I think we underestimate the importance of group dynamic. So we tend to look at children and humans specifically as individuals, but in this particular case, it's the group dynamic, and I work very much on the group dynamic that will dictate that. But if you have the right rules of the game for the group, then you neutralize any of that situation. But for that, again, you need a sense of confidence, you need people feeling safe, and then you can actually neutralize that sentiment. But it's about rules of the game of the group, in my experience.
But I have to say that having participated in the group that the Princess just led, boys and girls were very, very eager to participate and raise their hands, so that was encouraging from the gender perspective.
Yes.
I don't know how you train them. Can we have this? Maybe we can take
gender balance.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's. I'll take all the questions, and then I'll close off. Realizing I had promised maybe after the coffee the drink, but you're no doubt eager to have your drink afterwards. So I'll take all the questions together.
Ambassador, yo creo que vas a ser súper caballero porque le vamos a dar la palabra a la embajadora Aspe.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. A question on policy co-creation. Adults are in a way more complex than children in the sense of having more sophisticated strategies, maybe wanting power, money, having better strategies for deception, etc. And even when we think of good adults, good people can create bad outcomes. There are dynamics sometimes of collective action problems that create bad results. And we have seen this, for example, in collective budgeting exercises. And we see this with pollution, and we see this in many cases where individual people actually want to have a good result, and when policy is open to co-creation, sometimes we, however, get bad results. So do you have recommendations, or how do you work in terms of looking to open policy creation, but at the same time avoid these kind of traps and get good results? Thank you.
Ambassador Ward.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. Really, I mean, for a very, very interesting presentation, or not presentation, a very interesting conversation. I used to be Minister of Education in my country, and I have discussed many, many times with Minister Bussemaker on the issues of illiteracy and related. And I was kind of amazed by the figures you gave about the amount of it. So obviously you define illiteracy in a much broader sense than the one, for instance, that is used by the European Social Survey, which states that practically there are not illiterates in Europe, which is less than 1%. But of course, I'm more interested in your concept of illiteracy, which I guess is a functional concept, that not being able to appropriately read or understand text and things like that. And then the question, again, related with one of the other questions have been put, is to what extent in your research this is only related with the lack of capability, or not to say incapability, of the education system to deal with diversity. I mean, in a way, to diversity, exactly. In a way, to identify, to have an early tracking or for identifying the learning difficulties in the very, very early stages of the education process, and then really to find pathways to overcome this in an appropriate, because, I mean, from a perspective of systems, which are all the European systems where the average years of schooling are over 14, it's really a shame that we are not able to deal with this problem that, as you perfectly expressed, is really hindering in such a deep way the lives of people that suffer from that problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your sharing your comments and insightful remarks. My name is Masoud Kavousi. I am with the Development Center. I wanted to expand on one issue regarding the newly coined term for social media. In my view, that's oxymoron. All media are social. And social media is now having, in fact, some negative and anti-social consequences. And that I just wanted to get across. But I also wanted to ask you more of a sort of a personal, in terms of the Netherlands, that you have been the recipient of a large number of recent refugees, and many of them are children of Muslim nations. And what challenges do you face to assist them, to accommodate them, and to integrate them into the Dutch society? And thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Royal Highness. I want to come back to the question of dyslexia, because this is becoming more and more a problem in Germany. And some people say it's due to children using at an early age smartphones or watching TV, and partly they say it's due to teaching methods in school, which means in Germany, until the first and second class, children are taught you write as you hear. And then in the third class, they said, oh no, there are certain rules you have to respect in the German language. But then it's too late, because children are already learn things badly. So, and then they are already in a mobbing situation if they are half dyslexia or have half or part dyslexia. And in particular, poor families do not know how to deal with this problem. And there is not much of financial support for psychologists or psychiatrists. So I would like to know, what is the situation in the Netherlands? Is this an upcoming problem as well? And how do you deal with it? Do you have classes for children individually to help them with dyslexia, or also with give them psychological aid, or how do you cope with this problem? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk, Your Royal Highness. I very much agree with what you said. Having dialogue with children and having their opinion can be really fruitful. My question, though, is how do you reconcile having these dialogues with children with the daily routine that someone who's working in a position, how do you reconcile this with having dialogues with children? Like, what's the methodology that you use for someone who has a regular job and at the same time having dialogues with children and having their say? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very inspiring. I don't talk about PISA, but I want to talk about something more important and fundamental. You started the talk with the phrase of putting yourself in the shoes of others. I think that's the core of the empathy, which we are actually working on through PISA. But the difficult challenge is, as you illustrated through the example of the homeless people on the beach, sometimes in the societies or in the countries or even at the family level, we have the common ambition to do something good things to others. So we have the good intention, but sometimes we are not understanding in the same way the fundamental needs. So for example, your case of the beach, you know, homeless people on the beach, everybody might have ideas to help homeless people, to facilitate their lives, but somebody thought about the bus ticket as a strategy, whereas homeless people, for them, the strategy is other things. So maybe the challenge, and including the OECD's work, is to really identify the fundamental human needs. So for the case of the homeless people, maybe people focused on the actions, what strategy we need to put in, but maybe they shared, everybody, the same fundamental needs, like human dignity, or the respect, or the equality, or justice, whatever. So in the policy dialogues that we conduct through the OECD's work, our challenge, so it's my own reflection, is how we can best identify the fundamental needs on which we should build all the work and analysis, but also whose fundamental needs. So including children, we just generally talk about children's participation, but whose perspectives we want to respect or focus on, and how we can put children's perspectives into action. So you nicely mentioned that the innovation and actions should be developed with children, but also it should be done by children. So I don't know if you have any examples of the real impact that children has made in terms of the policy change or important decision making through the business sectors or public policy sectors. I think we need to really learn from the experiences, and maybe in the future we need to have a children's council at the OECD. Thank you.
Wow, a lot of interesting comments and thoughts, and I really thank you for that. I think one comment that that I wanted to end with, but that actually goes to some of the questions you have, is that obviously I devoured your wonderful policy brief on inclusive growth, and I thought it was very insightful, and there was one paragraph that says, how can we begin to fix it, to fix this? Because I thought it was very reflective to say that the old economic models that we all thought worked are no longer working. So you have the right reflections, but if I may say with all respect and appreciation for your work. So on the one hand, you say, if we want to save openness and interconnectedness of people and places, we need to rewrite the rules of the economic system to make them work for everyone. With my glasses that you've heard over the last hour, that does not give me the confidence that you really dare to go one step further and to say, to make them work with everyone. So how to shift your mindset from we need to do this for people, that anything you do needs to be with people. So that word for replaced by with is crucial, and it goes to a deeper problem that in society of the shift between the elite and people, and saying, well, how is this possible? When a journalist asked me, how can you speak with illiterate people? You're so learned and you've had all these degrees. And I said, well, I don't understand. We're humans. So I hope that taking your work forward, you replace a word for with. Policy creation. I think there is a big difference between, so it has to do with the notion of co-creation is organized chaos. And very often we do co-creation, but in a way it's a focus group. So we come up with a solution and we test with people, do you agree with this or not? And it's an individual who says yes or no, and then people may say, or a mayor. I had a conversation with a mayor about co-creation the other day, and he said, it's so difficult, I'm not going to listen to all these citizens. And I said, what is so difficult about it? He said, well, I don't know the outcome. Well, that's exactly what it is, to really, truly co-create. As the children said, you cannot ask a question and actually think you know the answer. So when we think about suboptimal outcomes, we have to accept that, yes, it's not always going to be the way we had planned it in our heads. So co-creation is a difficult and messy process sometimes. Functional illiteracy on the, and I had a discussion this morning with the Directeur Général of UNESCO, Mrs. Ozulé, and she talked about the redefining of literacy and the data, and I was very happy with that, because in the old thinking, the way we define literacy is old-fashioned in a way. It's a narrow-minded view on literacy. It's only reading and writing skills, and in the way that we've changed things in the Netherlands is we have now a model where we actually measure the level of participation in society, the level of being able to take care of your health, the level of self-confidence, and on the literacy is the functional illiteracy element. And I think that certainly in Europe, we need to look at, are you functioning as a person, yes or no? So I'm very happy that also UNESCO is now starting to relook at some of these definitions, because otherwise we're holding ourselves in a box. And on the one hand, we say 1 in 5 Europeans don't have the reading and writing skills to function in society, and UNESCO numbers show that 95% of Europe is literate. Well, it's not. So I'm glad that you bring that up, and I'm glad that UNESCO is working on developing that, but it is a crucial thing. There were some questions on the notion of dealing with diversity, dyslexia, and leading to the early childhood development. So in the Netherlands, we also have a big problem on dyslexia, that now sometimes we have 20% of a classroom with what we call a dyslexia declaration. And we know scientifically this is impossible. So it must be a mismatch of my earlier story between the methodology imposed and the way a child learns. The program and the innovation that I was talking about goes about the real prevention 0 to 4. So early childhood development, I was absolutely delighted to see this as one of the priorities in your inclusive growth strategy, and to say we need to start really understanding that investing in early childhood development is the best investment we can make in society, and the cost savings later on is in the billions and in the trillions. So I believe that we need to start fixing this problem, and by the time a child starts their school career with a backlog of a language of 2 years, it's perhaps already too late. So we're in the Netherlands, I want to connect this early childhood development with the program and the problems of the problems for teachers, which in the Netherlands is now a hot topic. Too much pressure of work and so on, and we don't actually find, we have a huge problem that we don't have enough teachers. But that's connected to the fact that your children, 25% of your class is often, you're struggling as a teacher. So these debates, I believe, need to get together. On Dutch refugee children, for me, refugees go to the heart of, the way we deal with refugees goes to the heart of how human we can be, and how a society is truly inclusive and open. And I am speaking a lot with refugees. And when I did a study among children and young people in the Netherlands about how they view the refugee situation and their solutions to it, I also spoke to a school with refugees' children. And the school, I wanted them to think with me on the solutions of how Dutch society needs to deal with refugees. And I wasn't allowed to. And I asked them why. And they said, well, if they participate in your study and we allow them to speak up, we give them hope. And I said, but how can you dare to take away hope for a child? So I believe that this is a great challenge that we have. and that we need to dare to speak to refugees and say, how does integration, what do we need to do together for integration to work? And very often solutions are still, again, imposed on refugees. And they're giving me lists of 25 interventions of things we design for them that just simply don't work because they had come from another culture. And finally, putting yourself in the shoes of others, identifying human needs, and how to do that as OECD, perhaps to, as a wrap-up, and really sets the classroom free. And I apologize for taking longer than they planned 5 o'clock. I believe that when you connect worlds that speak this different language, you need translators. So I would advise you as OECD that if indeed you do want to bring that into your policy formulation, you cannot do it with the knowledgeable mindset that you have, because listening to people and human needs is a different skill set than designing statistics and doing research in the more cerebral way. So I always say that in my foundation, what we do is we're translators. We understand the needs of the policymakers and the decision makers, and we go and get, and you heard me do this in the dialogue, I go and get it from the minds of the people. So I think that a dialogue with real people as part of your policy process should happen, but that you cannot underestimate that it is a special skill set that you need. So don't make it a focus group. Don't make it don't think in target groups. And to end with a specific example of how an insight from children is implemented by a company, and I have dozens of them, is one of the big insurance companies in the Netherlands. I mentioned this afternoon. Their problem is that they have an 18% return rate on their mortgages. So only 18% of their customers take the mortgage from that company the second time. So very low. And they don't understand why they can't fix that. But they've always worked through agents. So the children in their advice said, well, you don't know how to be a friend. It's as simple as that. So one of the board members was extremely intrigued and could listen in between the lines and actually said, well, I'll give you the confidence and go. And what we did with a company that I set up, H.R.H, what we did is we did a study with children and illiterate people, how to be a lifelong friend. So we came up with recommendations for the company, how to be a lifelong friend, and why children and illiterate people. Because children understand when connection really works, and illiterate people understand the hassle of daily life, and they have already passed a life full of mistrust. So we combined those type of insights. We presented it, and we actually got to the very essence of their business model. And what we're now going to do is completely rewrite their client approach on mortgages. So you hear me that children and illiterate people and people can actually say, where is the customer journey going wrong? So when you think about identifying human insights, I would advise you not to think children, or let's just say, you can bring in children, so don't think just in target groups, but think in what insight can help me best get to the human needs. So if we need emotional insights, even if it's on something nothing to do with children, bring in children to help advise you. So it's much broader than that. So on that, I would really, again, like to close to thank OECD for this amazing afternoon. It's been a great pleasure working with you. I appreciate the openness. I appreciate the tremendous time for lots of, if you could measure the IQ in this room, the whole house would be blown away, and that you allow me to bring in this strange dimension, but necessary dimension of human insights into this room is really very special. And the last advice is from a child. And children, if you ask them why adults have such a hard time fixing problems, they say three things. So may this inspire your work. They say, adults always forget the first step. Adults always take steps that are too big. And adults always forget about why they do things. So I leave you with that thought, and I thank you very, very much.
On the contrary, Her Royal Highness, the Secretary General had to take a plane, as usual, to Ireland. But we want to thank you for your inspiring words. I have to say that we have been listening to these reflections that you have conducted with social innovation experiments. The real question is, how do we scale them up? But many of the topics that you have brought are very close to our agenda. And we really thank you. Thank you for your passion, for your commitment, and for caring about all these things that we also care about at the OECD. And thank you, Ambassador, for having facilitated this. Thank you all. And to the next, thank you to Mario and to those that organized the coffees of the Secretary General.